Welcome and thank you for tuning in for another Rice Rewind. Today, I am re-releasing what is technically my second interview with Max Keiser, and we'll come back to that first interview in just a moment. Max is an American broadcaster and filmmaker. He is the former host of the Keiser Report and the current host of the Orange Pill podcast, both of which feature his wife, Stacey Herbert. He is also the senior Bitcoin advisor to the president of El Salvador. And this interview was originally recorded and released on April 17th, 2020. Now let's get back to that first interview. The first time that I interviewed Max, we used Skype per his request. I have never used Skype to record an interview before that, and have not used it since. Unfortunately, we had an issue where Max got disconnected. Now, had I been recording on Zoom, there would not have been no issue. I didn't know that once Max reconnected, I would need to start recording again. And unfortunately, we learned from our mistakes. Now, this interview was never released on YouTube. I did release it on alternative platforms. But I will include that first incomplete interview with Max Keiser at the end of today's video. Appreciate you taking the time to do this, man.
Yeah, just looking at your YouTube channel, the Rice Crypto Show.
What do you think?
It's pretty cool, man. It's pretty cool. I'm happy to be on. I thank you for inviting me. Let me put on my cool shades. You know, I gave you the full effect.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, joining me on today's show is the Bishop of Bitcoin, the representative of Satoshi on Earth, the one and only Max Keiser. Max, how you doing today, man?
Rice, super. Great to be back with you as the Bishop of Bitcoin, the Satoshi's representative on Earth. I feel blessed. You know, back in September of last year, my Twitter account froze up. And I have, you know, my password works and everything, but it just wouldn't let me tweet. And I took that as a sign from Satoshi to create real Max Keiser on Twitter. And I've just been channeling the spirit of Satoshi as Satoshi's bishop here on Earth. And it's been great. I think the coronavirus is just one more step in Bitcoin domination, global and intergalactic Bitcoin domination. Nobody should fear the coronavirus. It's just all part of the process.
I love it, dude. I love it. I love the attitude. And we'll definitely get into that. But I really wanted, okay, I guess before we really start things, how is quarantine life treating you and Stacey? You guys doing all right?
Yeah, this is the best quarantine ever, really. There hasn't really, the only thing that's different is that we do the show at home. We don't do it in a studio, and it works out better. We less time driving. The production quality is higher, and it's just commute from the kitchen to the living room. It's very easy, and it's a lot of fun, a lot more fun. Max and Stacey can have more like fun doing it because there are less kind of engineers around and camera and sound guys. And, you know, I was joking with those guys a few months ago. I said, these iPhones are getting so good that eventually they're going to put you guys out of business. And sure enough, I was correct, because we can do the show just using 2 iPhone 11s, and we can make it look like 4 cameras because we're shooting in 4K, and it allows us the ability to zoom in without loss of resolution on both cameras. And that's done with our mixer in director in London. And the product is better, and our Spanish audience is exploding, Rice. I can't believe it. We're getting 400,000 views per Keiser Report dubbed into Spanish, and I think that plays into the whole Bitcoin message as well.
No, most definitely, man. And I'm kind of glad that people like you are getting to experience working from home and using this modern technology, because, I mean, I've been doing it for a minute, and it's very possible for someone, you know, I'm sitting in a bedroom basically that I've turned into an office. And, you know, I mean, it's great what we can do with technology, and I feel blessed with that, man. So I really wanted to get your thoughts, man, on everything that's going on right now with what they're terming as the Great Lockdown, with everything that it encompasses, regarding the Federal Reserve, all this stimulus money, how it's going to affect the economy. I'd really just like to get your overall thoughts, and then we can kind of dig into some of those topics.
Yeah, well, the topic of the Federal Reserve, of course, is a topic we've been talking about in the Bitcoin community since day one. And the macroeconomic assumptions and macroeconomic implications of Bitcoin have always been discussed, but usually in kind of the shadows of the technology itself. And then when Steve Moose came out with the Bitcoin standard, he really wrote the economics book on Bitcoin, and it brought the macro really to the forefront, and people started to discuss it more vigorously. And then COVID-19 crisis, where you have really the response of the global central banks to print exponentially. And that meme, printer goes burr,
Yeah.
that really encapsulates in people's mind the relationship between the central bank and the stock market. So, I saw a friend of mine was tweeting something to the effect that we used to value stocks based on price earnings ratio, but we really don't do that anymore. We just look at the price.
Yeah.
And there are no earnings. None of these companies are really making earnings, really. The economy is in lockdown, but the price keeps going up because the speculative pockets of cash out there in hedge funds and sovereign wealth funds and even central banks themselves, they're just buying with reckless abandon. They're buying anything out there. So the price will continue to go up because they're going to continue to print money. And it gets back to the old adage that we coined back on the Keiser Report, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer. You can't taper a Ponzi. You can't taper a Ponzi scheme. So, this they have to keep printing. They're in a box.
No, I agree. I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of like the only tool that they have left to really keep this thing happening. And, since you mentioned it like that, I mean, we've seen reports coming out that we have seen the best week of Dow since 1938. We've seen the best week in the stock market since 1974. But at the same time, we have right now over 22 million Americans unemployed. So I heard you talking about the Cantillon effect and wealth inequality. How do you explain this to the average person who doesn't know what's going on? Why does the stock market keep going up and everything looks like it's all right, but then you see all these people who are unemployed, which is a complete opposite end of the spectrum, and it makes no sense to see both headline news pieces in the same articles or same front page or same website or what. You're seeing this on the same pages, and it's crazy.
Right. Well, the Wall Street and Main Street don't usually go in sync. So when Main Street's doing well, Wall Street is suffering. And when Main Street is suffering, Wall Street is doing well. And that's been exacerbated really since the Reagan years. Remember Reagan, when he became president, he fired the air traffic controllers. And he started this era of Reagan Thatcherism or neoliberalism, where organized labor was systematically dismantled, and wages never kept up with inflation or barely kept up with inflation. And the inflation number itself was being misreported because of what economists call hedonic adjustments. The classic example being if the price of steak gets too high in the basket of goods, they calculate inflation. They hedonically adjust steak for hamburger. So hamburger is cheaper. And now they say, oh, look, inflation's not going up because now they don't calculate steak. They calculate hamburger. And they make those adjustments every year to make it look like inflation is low. They have an incentive to make inflation look low like that because it means no COLA, cost of living adjustments. For example, it helps a lot of people not to have inflation stated. They also don't really calculate labor at all, or they don't. They have been able to financially engineer since the Reagan years, since deregulation, because he brought in that huge wave of deregulation. They've been able to create an economy where both labor and taxpayers are superfluous. Well, let's take a look at taxes last year. 3.5 trillion what were paid in taxes last year. And yet last week or 2 weeks ago, the Fed printed over close to 6 trillion as a gift to their friends in the hedge fund industry, right? Yeah. So, and they're going to print a lot more. They're going to print 50, 60 trillion. The global central banks are set now to fulfill a promise they made at Davos in 2011, where they openly stated they were willing to print 100 trillion to recapitalize the central banks around the world. So they don't really need your tax money to make tons of money in the stock market. They don't really need your labor, right? There's always going to be some poor schmuck willing to work for $1 an hour, Yeah. They're dismantling all the regulations and getting rid of all kind of labor protections or minimum wage or anything like that. So they don't need workers. They don't need taxes. They just need people to, I say people are going to be kind of migrating to a model of the economy that I've been talking about for many years now. I call it the casino gulag. Okay. And the quarantine is kind of the gulag now. So people are locked at home, stay at home. They can't move. And their only hope of making a living now that everything's been destroyed on the employment front is to click on ads, online and maybe get a protein pill to survive another day. So this is the casino gulag. Play a game. That's the casino. If you win, you get a protein pill. If you lose, then you die, and our statistics look better because we're going to have to distribute free money to less people. So we don't care if you die. But, spin the wheel online and get a protein pill. You might live another day. You might not. We don't care. And that's happening now in 2020. I didn't know what year it would become official, but I think 2020 is the year of the casino gulag. And so stock markets can go a lot higher because they can print 60, 70 trillion dollars, 100 trillion dollars. There's no limit to it. When they print, they're borrowing money essentially, and the cost of borrowing money is zero. So It doesn't really matter what doesn't. They could print $500 trillion. It doesn't matter if your cost is nothing and the cost of production is nothing. Print all day long.
Well, but how long can they honestly print their way? There has to be an end point. Like, where do you see that coming? Do you see us hitting like a point of inflation, like what Japan has experienced with the yen, or do you see us hitting a point of hyperinflation like Venezuela or Zimbabwe?
Good question, Rice. The end game of all of this. I have my unique take on this, and I've been putting this out there for a couple of years. I call it neo-feudalism. And it means that all this money printing and all the purchases of stocks by the central banks, and the central bank is a group of private bankers, right? It's not the government, it's a group of private bankers. So is taking private. So like Google, Apple, Amazon, all of these trillion-dollar companies could be taken private at $2 trillion or $3 trillion and just taken off the market. Remember, a few years ago, Michael Dell decided, I don't want to be a public company. I want to be a private company. So he took himself private. He did a leveraged buyout of himself, right? So they just take all these companies private. And so now you've got a private oligarchy that controls 99.999% of all income producing assets. And then you have the peasant class, the casino gulag class, who's trying to win a protein pill. So you have lords and serfs. That's feudalism. That's neo-feudalism. We escaped neo-feudalism a couple of 100 years ago or 300 years ago. We escaped feudalism. Right. And but now, of course, we're going back to it. The only surviving legacy piece of the old Middle Ages, the old medieval feudalism, is the Bank of England. That was really the carrying over institution that linked monarchies of the past to the present day. And, America tried desperately to keep central banks out of America until 1913. Finally, the old monarchs won, and they got the Federal Reserve established. And that was really the beginning of the end of the United States, as it was. The concept was originally the founding fathers, and so now here we have in 2020 We have really a return to medievalism and feudalism and the casino gulag model, and that's the way it is. I think the sooner people realize that, the sooner they can make the adjustment, because you need to make an adjustment.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, and this is like really kind of uncharted territories. And that's why I was telling you before we started, like, how long do you have? Because there's so much going on. Like, and I really would definitely like to get your thoughts on a lot of these subjects. I mean, we're seeing like a yo-yo market happening. And it seems like it's absolutely crazy. We're seeing an issue of distribution, which I've seen you and Stacy talk about, where it seems like the central banks and like the stock markets are able to get that bailout, able to get that money right away. And here people are still waiting for some other stimulus money. And it seems like they're giving that money to the banks first and then allowing it to go to the people, which is kind of interesting because that's allowing for more money for the banks with their fractional reserve banking. Now you see the banking requirement, reserve requirement being diminished, dropped down to zero. The Federal Reserve is now becoming like a central bank to the world, lending to other central banks. Do you see like us nationalizing all these industries that we're bailing out?
No, because I don't think the government's going to be around much longer. It's going to be overtaken by the corpocracy. So I don't think the government, as we understand that concept, I don't think it's going to be lasting much longer. A few years, maybe. This election coming up in November looks like it's going to be a complete disaster. And corporations write the policies that they want. Google writes the speech policies that they want. They don't respect the Second Amendment. Amazon writes labor policies that is favorable to Amazon. I just read a great essay about how this dystopian nightmare was mirrored in the cyberpunks of the early 1980s, who wrote about the absence of corporations going forward and the emergence of this kind of casino gulag model. And one of the examples they use is the movie, the science fiction movie in LA, Blade Runner. Thank you, Stacy. And right, so in Blade Runner, you have the Tyrell Corporation, and the Tyrell Corporation has replicants, that do all their work for them. And one of the remarkable parts of it is that there's no mention of any governments, right? You never hear anyone talk about a government in Blade Runner, because the governments have all been eviscerated. They've all been marginalized and put out of business, essentially. So I don't think we're going to have a government as such in a few years, and it's just going to be corporations. So the rating that you have with Google, whether you can post stuff online or not, that's your government. Can you set up a shop on Amazon and sell something? That's your government. The social contract is being co-opted by the corporations, rewritten and repurposed and represented as the corporate contract. So we're moving from the common good to the industrial good.
Okay, and you definitely explained that well, and it makes a lot of sense. What I'm curious about with the Federal Reserve, and there's been a lot of talk about this, and it seems kind of speculative, but I wanted to get your take on like the function of the special purpose vehicle as it kind of pertains to the controls of the Treasury. And it kind of seems like, from what I'm hearing in a lot of the stimulus bills and executive orders, that there may be a situation where the Treasury is somehow neutering the Federal Reserve. And maybe, have you heard anything to this effect?
Yeah, sure. So the special purpose vehicle, the SPV, was yet another example of laws being completely ignored. There's a standing law, this rule, I forget the number of the rule, but it's right there in the rule book of the Federal Reserve Bank. They cannot buy junk bonds. Right? So the special purpose vehicle set up by the Treasury Department allowed them to buy junk bonds. So Steve Mnuchin at Treasury, he's a former Wall Street guy, and he knows all the tricks of the trade. He knows how finance works. So, it's a classic Wall Street solution. There's no such thing as no on Wall Street. It's only yes. The answer is always yes. And, the phrase used on Wall Street is do whatever you want. We got lawyers, right? There's never any red light. Do whatever you want. Just bring in the business. And if you break a law, quote unquote, we'll happy to pay a small fine, or we'll get the law changed, or we'll rewrite the law. So don't ever think about any legal consequences about anything you're doing. Just bring in the business. I worked on Wall Street for many years, and that is the mantra that was common amongst every firm on Wall Street. And that's why when you meet brokers and bankers, they tend to be very cocky, and they have this, they're very full of themselves because they know there's no law applies to them. And it's just, they literally go to work every day and pluck $1,000 bills from the money tree and then argue about silly things and make funny jokes. And that's the life of a Wall Streeter. And I know it well. I lived it for many years.
No, and you definitely have that perspective, and I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, it really sounds like, in a way, though, like what you're saying is there's not a good ending to this. And, like what happens to the 99%? And we can get into Bitcoin here in just a moment, but how does this play out? Like, is there going to be a good ending for the people?
Well, okay, so let's talk about Bitcoin for a second. So you have 22 million people unemployed now. That number is going to go much higher. And the question I have for everybody out there who's unemployed, how come you don't have any savings? Right now, there's a few layers to this question. The obvious question, obviously, is, I'm working 3 jobs and just to make ends meet, I can't possibly save any money. But that's not really the right answer. The right answer is that you live in a country and you live in an economy that vilifies savings. Keynesianism, which is the policy that guides the American economy and is articulated by Nobel Prize-winning Paul Krugman at the New York Times, means that savings are considered anti-business, anti-well-being, anti-American. He often talks about the savings glut. Oh my God, it's a glut. We have to get rid of it. And therefore, you have a population of people that is living on credit cards, that believes that savings are a negative, that thinks that there's no reason to have a rainy day fund. There's no reason to save for anything. I can always just put it on my credit card. I can always borrow the money. I can go to college and borrow 50, 60,000, 100,000, 150,000. That's what the establishment tells me is the right thing to do. This is completely opposite than the Austrian School of Economics that says the economy is based on savings. Without a pool of savings, without a pool of capital, you cannot have capitalism, right? You cannot have capitalism without capital, and capital means savings. So in America, they don't have capitalism. They have Keynesianism, which is similar to communism, Soviet Union era communism, where it's like, we're the state. We'll tell you what the prices of stuff are. You don't worry your little head about it. Just get in line and get your protein pill. And now it's not, it's patently not working as many predicted. So Bitcoin is a savings vehicle. It is primarily a savings vehicle. It was invented to be a savings vehicle. The white paper, when it mentions cash, just replace the word gold for cash, and you'll understand the white paper. Roger Ver obviously doesn't understand the white paper. He thinks that Bitcoin is a transaction mechanism, which is completely, and you see what's happened to him. He got Bitcoin derangement syndrome. He's gone insane. Went the hard fork way with Bitcoin Cash, which has proven to be utter trash, flaming dumpster fire. So is Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, right? And if you go against Bitcoin, Bitcoin will destroy you. You don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. That's the golden rule. If you try to change Bitcoin, you're going to look like Craig Wright or Roger Ver, a discredited bum on the street, begging. Don't go down that path. Let Bitcoin change you. That's why I'm the bishop of Bitcoin, because I'm the apostle of Satoshi. I channel the words of the master, and I hope people understand it. maybe today a few more people will get it. I hope so. Don't
Well, I mean,
listen to, save. Bitcoin saves.
I think, and I agree with what you're saying. I can see, both points of views. I understand because we don't really know who Satoshi is. Satoshi hasn't actually explained to us himself, itself, their self, the actual vision. So people are going to speculate what they interpret it to mean. And that's neither here nor there. I mean, we all want to see the adoption of Bitcoin. That's how I feel. I'm not dismissing what you're saying. I just understand both camps. But
Let me interject here. So
okay.
do you necessarily need to understand what's going on? Okay, in my view, Bitcoin is aesthetically one of the most beautiful objects, beautiful things ever created. It's the Sistine Chapel of money. When you are in the Sistine Chapel, when you look at the Sistine Chapel, or you look at a Rodin sculpture in the Rodin Museum Garden in Paris, or you are looking at the Mona Lisa, are you looking at a Da Vinci, do you understand why aesthetically you're pleased, why you're filled with a sense of wonder, why you feel closer to a spiritual kind of revelation when you see something that gorgeous, that beautiful? That's the Bitcoin protocol. That's why it has 85% of the hash rate and every single altcoin is shrinking. It's got 65% of the market cap. It attracts capital the same way the Mona Lisa attracts millions and millions of people to the Mona Lisa. If you put the Mona Lisa up against 50 other paintings in the Louvre in Paris, and some newbie showed up and said, pick out the one that's most beautiful, 99.9% of them wouldn't have any idea what's most beautiful. But that person that stops before the Mona Lisa and says, hold on, I am moved in some way, then that suddenly exponentially, proliferates through the ideosphere and touches our collective unconscious. And suddenly, as a species, we're elevated. If you don't understand that aspect of it, the spiritual aspect of Bitcoin, then you're going to be in a lot of pain.
No, and I definitely agree with what you're saying. I mean, I definitely believe in Bitcoin. I believe in the Satoshi white paper. I believe in the way of it getting us away from the controls of central banks and fiat money. I mean, I think that creative destruction is a beautiful thing. And you could look at that as like encompassing. That's why I talk about my practice change of us also trying to evolve as well. We're trying to change the world and disrupt technologies and disrupt industries. We need to evolve as human beings as well. Or we're going to continue to have these same problems that we've been having throughout the history of mankind if we don't learn from our mistakes and our lessons. And I definitely agree that Bitcoin is a beautiful thing. And we're seeing why, but Bitcoin was created for exactly this reason of everything that we're talking about today. It was designed in 2008. The white paper came out in, was it Halloween 2008? And then 2009, January, it was first mined. That's when a Genesis block came out. So it was birthed out of the 2008 crisis that we experienced. And now we're finally, for the first time, seeing Bitcoin being put to the test of what I feel like it was created for. Do you feel like people are going to start embracing this technology, especially with the fact that we're seeing the supply of physical precious metals diminishing? Do you see people finally adopting Bitcoin?
Well, a couple of points. First of all, I agree with you that now we have a huge crisis. So we're going to see how Bitcoin performs in a crisis. It was born out of the last crisis in 2008. And we've been waiting for the next crisis, which we all knew was coming. Here it is. Now we see how Bitcoin performs during this crisis. So in terms of how it's going to perform or what it's going to do in this crisis, I think that we don't need to worry about Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin could go to 100,000 or 400,000, and the humans could disappear off the face of the earth. Humans as a species might not make it, but Bitcoin will. Bitcoin is never going to go away, and but we as humans need to worry about ourselves. We shouldn't be worrying about Bitcoin. It's fine, and it's doing. You can orient yourself toward it and be elevated by it, or you can turn your back to it and be caught up in the tar pit of the legacy system and go down with the dinosaurs. And that's your choice. But it's not. We don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't care about us, and it's going to do fine without us. But as I've said a long time, that the price of 100,000 or 400,000 could be reached, but might not be any humans around to experience it.
That's an interesting concept to think about. What about the correlation that Bitcoin has experienced recently in Q1 with like the equity indexes? And do you see it separating? Do you people talking about the stock to flow ratio? You want to discuss that a little bit?
The correlation is there is no correlation. Bitcoin doesn't correlate with anything. It went from nothing to the current price. What is the current price?
It just hit
7,000?
right over 7,000. Yeah.
Right. So it went from 0 to 0.000 of a penny to 7,000 over 11 years. Right. It doesn't correlate with anything. It might temporarily on a chart appear to correlate to something at one point. But that is very short-sighted. If you pull back and you look at the big picture, it's totally unique. It's like a meteor strike. What does that correlate to? It correlates to the world just got blown up by a meteor. That's what it correlates to. So, it doesn't really correlate to anything. As far as gold, gold is the closest corollary to Bitcoin, and it's hitting new all-time highs against all major currencies around the world except the dollar. Looks like it's going to do that in the dollar very soon. Gold was the go-to store of value without any third-party risk. Didn't need to be verified. It needed to be verified, and that was a shortcoming of it. It has some shortcomings. Then it has a few shortcomings, right? It's hard to move around. It's hard to verify, and these shortcomings are removed. Bitcoin. That's why it's potentially could be the perfect way to liberate people from the tyranny of centralized authority, not only central banks, but centralized governments. So not only is it getting rid of the central banks, but it's getting rid of the nation states as well, because they're totally unneeded.
Totally makes sense. And I really wanted to bring that up. I mean, I agree 100% with what you said, but I've been hearing a lot of people talking about this, and I wanted to get your take on it. Look,
let me tell you something about people who talk about this. If they come from a stock trading background, they're going to look at it like a stock. If they come from a precious metals background, they're going to look at it like a precious metal. If they're technical traders, they're going to look at the Fibonacci number and the technical patterns and the double trip and the head and shoulders and the triple top. And that's how they see the view. It depends on the lens through which you see the world. That's how you're going to frame Bitcoin. If you see it, as somebody who is purely in the technological space, you're going to look at it completely different as well. But that's where you're coming from, and that's the only way you can see something. But the whole is beyond comprehension of any single person looking at it. The only way to comprehend it is if the whole understands it, and that's through the collective unconscious. So that has to have a serious upgrade. The collective unconscious of humans is in dire need of an upgrade. It's really suffering from the drag of ego. Ego is always the enemy of faith. And ego is, you see it in this space. You have egomaniacs or Bitcoin derangement syndrome, like a John McAfee. I know you've had him on your show, and he's a wonderful character, and he's a really interesting eccentric. But I would think that, he's an egomaniac, and that's Bitcoin made him more of what he was, and that is an egomaniac.
It definitely amplified him.
Right, and it amplifies someone like Andreas Antonopoulos, who before Bitcoin was just a really good-hearted, meaning a guy who really cares about people, and then amplified that. Then he became Andreas, who we all love and respect, and because it amplified that. And that's what it can do. It changes you. You don't change it, right? That's the golden rule. So don't try to look for any pattern. Just let go and let Satoshi.
That's very wise words. Any thoughts on the halving? Because we have the halving. It's like, I guess right now about 25 days-ish away. I'm not exactly sure, but we're kind of close to that number.
The halving is just one part of the protocol. It's I don't think it's any in particular. I don't think it's more. I don't weight the significance of the halving over other aspects of the protocol. My favorite part of the protocol is the difficulty adjustment. That's my favorite part. Because the way it sniffs out our failings as humans is ingenious. So just when we're about to quit, it lowers the difficulty adjustment and restokes our greed and gets us mining again on spec, right?
Yeah,
So that's freaking ingenious, and I don't think it's even man-made. I think it's just an industrial accident like Velcro or some of these other things that came around, plastics, X-rays, Viagra. It's an industrial accident. The cypherpunks are trying to solve the double spend problem, and then suddenly, bam! They put together these things, and it became Bitcoin. Just like, again, refer to a great painting. Everyone has a palette with different paints. They've got a paintbrush. They've got a canvas. They've got 100 million painters out there, and they're all putting paint to canvas, but only occasionally does one actually pop out, and it's like, oh my God, that is a work of genius. And it changes everything. It just changes everything. And it also amplifies, let me also, people who are amplified, Nouriel Rubini, Peter Schiff, right? Their egomania was amplified. Their stubbornness was amplified. Their inability to think with any kind of agility was amplified. Their shortcomings as economists and financiers was amplified. Right. So and now they're never going to come back. Peter Schiff's never going to come back from the mistakes he made with Bitcoin. Since I told him to buy it at $10,
right,
$100. I begged him in his living room when he lived in Westport, Connecticut, before I moved to Puerto Rico. And he's just like, he's got a million reasons why he shouldn't do it. And now he's underperforming the market in a spectacular way. And he's become, a poster child for Bitcoin derangement syndrome. So, but that's what the protocol does. Don't fight the protocol. Don't fight Satoshi. Just let go and let Satoshi.
Just let go. I love it, dude. I love it, man. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you today, man. And I definitely would like to bring you back on soon. And I'm glad that we actually got to complete an interview. I'm going to have links down below for that first interview. That was my technical screw up because we were using Skype. We got disconnected.
No, we didn't use Stacy the first time. That's why it didn't work.
Stacy's magical. I love Stacy. I love you too, Max. And I appreciate all you guys do. Before we wrap things up, was there anything that I didn't ask or anything that you wanted to talk about real quick?
No.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Well, if you don't mind just lingering for 1 second, I'm going to do my little wrap up and I'll talk to you here afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have links down below for that first incomplete interview with Max Keiser that took place last year. I'm going to have, I encourage you to explore my channel. If you like what I'm doing, you can support me by liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change. And I love you all. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, today we are joined by the legend himself, Max Keiser. Max, thanks for coming on the show today, man. How are you doing?
Chris, Rice, thanks so much for inviting me. And it's a beautiful day here in America. We're defending our freedom and our freedom of speech. And we all love Bitcoin.
Hell yeah, Bitcoin. Definitely love Bitcoin. Something I wanted to ask you in your own words, Max, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, who Max Keiser is?
Well, I've been involved in finance and markets for, 30 years, really. I started on Wall Street. Then in Los Angeles, I created the Hollywood Stock Exchange, and I have a patent on virtual currencies and virtual securities and how to make markets in those. And then when I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011, I immediately kind of related it to what I was working on with the Hollywood Stock Exchange. And so I got involved very early on when it was $1. And our show, Keiser Report, which is on RT, and it broadcasts to 100 countries, and it has 30 million viewers a week. So a lot of people all over the world first heard about Bitcoin through the Keiser Report. And we made the case back then that, we came from gold and silver. This is digital gold. This is gold 2.0. And so we transitioned our audience from gold and silver into Bitcoin, saying that this is a store of value, basically. And this whole discussion now about, is it payments or is it a store of value? We've been talking about it as a new asset class and as a digital commodity since really 2011. And I see Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve Bank just yesterday talked about Bitcoin as a store of value. And so that idea is, I think, starting to really get understood.
Yeah, and I would agree about that. I mean, you're definitely seeing a lot about that. Speaking of Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, I know you saw President Trump's tweets yesterday about Bitcoin, saying that it's not money, its value is based on thin air, and it facilitates unlawful behavior. I did see you kind of tweet back. Do you mind sharing your thoughts and feelings on Donald Trump's recent remarks on Bitcoin?
Right. So this was predictable, and but that the honey badger is working its way up through institutions, through organizations, through governments, and it's taking on all of these, let's call them entrenched oligopolists, folks that have had their way for decades without being challenged at all. And the US dollar is obviously in the crosshairs of Bitcoin. And I think what triggered all this, of course, is the Facebook's Libra coin. So when Facebook comes out, and they're a $400 or $500 billion company, and they say that they're going to move into what they call cryptocurrencies, et cetera, then that really triggers Congress. It really triggers people who are now making the bells ringing, and they're saying, wait a minute, as one congressperson said, you're going to have a parallel system to the dollar. It's going to be run out of Switzerland, and it challenges the dollar. And then, Trump has followed up and said that the dollar is king and nothing will usurp the dollar. And so it's predictable that we come to this stage. And so, as many have commented, including myself, it doesn't matter what Trump says. It's not really in his power to stop the Bitcoin revolution. The fact that it's now in the White House is, I think, an important milestone, a watershed moment. Various governments are going to now have to take a position on this. My feeling, Chris Rice, is that at some point, a government will start to put Bitcoin into their strategic reserves along with their gold position. And then this will set the stage for a new kind of chapter in the global finance. And I hear some whistling. Is that in my headphone, or is there?
No, it's actually outside my window. Apparently there's an ambulance or something going on. I apologize to everybody about that distraction. I can't really help what happens outside.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. I need
it's kind of crazy.
I
was listening to it thinking, oh God. Yeah,
that's
sorry
okay.
about that.
All right. So we sorted that. All right, cool. So it's predictable. They were on a collision course. And it's funny because there's the various stages that people go through when they encounter Bitcoin. And we see this in mainstream economists like Peter Schiff or Nouri El-Roubini and others who reject it at face value. They never really dig into it. They never look at it closely. They just kind of dismiss it. And but they're missing the boat here. There's a major revolution going on, and this is pretty much where we thought we would be going back to 2011. We knew this day would come.
And it's a great day. I mean, it's good to see that the governments are actually getting scared. I mean, Bitcoin was designed to take away and take on fiat money. So this day was coming, and this is a revolution. I agree. Do you think that we're in a different market today than we were in late December, November 2017?
I do. Going back to the history of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies a bit. So during the 2014-2015 period, this idea that Bitcoin wasn't scaling and that Blockstream was not acting in good faith, and it caused a lot of strife in the community. And you had a lot of projects kind of split off the altcoin market. You had hard forks of Bitcoin, and these coins gained tremendous traction. At the same time, CNBC discovered Bitcoin and crypto, and they had a lot of folks on their show, and they gave them huge exposure. And you had this enormous bull market from, let's call it 1,000 or 2,500 to 20,000. This enormous run, and there was total market cap of crypto was 850 billion, I believe, and a lot of the so-called altcoins were doing great. Now, since that time, since the bear market and now the resumption of a bull market, I think a lot of people are understanding that Bitcoin is the place to be, and we're seeing a divergence. So we're seeing Bitcoin break away from the pack. The Bitcoin dominance index is now at 65%. That's up
65,
35%, yeah. Right? It was 35% a year ago or so. I think that's going to continue to go higher. And it's not that the other projects are not good projects. It's not that the people involved with them are not good people, good developers, good programmers. I mean, these are, entrepreneurs and great folks. I just think the market is now going to start to, the money flow, the big money flow, the institutional money flow is going to look at more at Bitcoin. It's the most secure chain. And there's going to be this divergence is going to continue. I say that's the big difference here.
Okay, I agree. And I noticed that you were on CNBC's show with Rand Nooner, and you were talking about the altcoin phenomenon is basically finished. You said that Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV are going to go to $10, and most altcoins are going to go to pennies or out of existence. Are there any altcoins that you own, support, or see potential in?
No, I don't. Within the last year, I've just migrated completely off everything but Bitcoin. So, I mean, there was a time when these different projects were quite, I went through the dot-com era in the 90s. I started the Hollywood Stock Exchange in 1995, and through 96, 97, 98, you had huge number of companies came into existence, and they were trying all kinds of crazy stuff, and a lot of them were super exciting. Then you had the crash, I guess it was 2001, and the NASDAQ lost like 85% of its value. $5 trillion was wiped off in that crash. And then from the rubble emerged some major players, Google, Facebook, and a few others. They dominated, and all those hundreds and hundreds of smaller startups, they either got glommed, taken over or went out of business, et cetera. So I think similarly in this Bitcoin crypto space, it's time now for Bitcoin to assert its dominance, and I don't see any competitors out there.
Okay, that's cool. So it's safe to say that Max Keiser is a Bitcoin maximalist?
Well, that term maximalist, I believe, was first floated by Vitalik as a kind of way to disparage the Bitcoin community. And I met Vitalik when he was still writing for Bitcoin Magazine in London. He was just launching Ethereum. It was a brand new project. And he was frustrated by the Bitcoin community that it wasn't moving fast enough and doing what he thought it needed to do. So he started Ethereum. Okay, so now here we are. And is Ethereum going to be the one? Is it going to be around in a year or two? It's got a lot of kind of competitors out there. It seems to be looking for a use case, and maybe not. And so that term maximalism, which is a derogatory term, I guess I could identify as a maximalist. But there's a lot of logic behind it. There's a lot of reason to go down that path.
Okay, I get you. And I know you're really big into gold and silver. What I wanted to ask you was, you tweeted something about gold cannot offer the same individual sovereignty to the extent of Bitcoin. Do you still recommend that people who are using Bitcoin as a store of value to also invest and hold things like precious metals, gold and silver?
Yeah, we still like gold. And in terms of the comment about individual sovereignty, so with Bitcoin, you have this very interesting characteristic of offering individual sovereignty. You own your private keys. It's unconfiscatable. And so this is really, we've never seen this before as such. There's no trust involved. I don't need to trust a third party. I don't need any gold that I own is stored in a vault. I have to trust the vault. The gold itself has to be verified. I have to trust someone who's going to verify the gold. So gold, in that sense, can't offer individual sovereignty to the extent that Bitcoin can. Now, I think that gold is a fine place to be, gold and silver, as hard money. I made the point recently that Bitcoin made hard money fashionable again. And then suddenly there's a push into gold. Gold is not, it's going to go up. It's going to go up, but not at the same rate as Bitcoin. Bitcoin will outperform gold. I think I'm one of the few people that can really push either gold, Bitcoin, or silver. That's pretty much been the focus now for 8 or 9 years. And I can talk about all of them. There's a fake war going on between the gold bugs and the crypts. The bugs versus the crypts. Peter Schiff is trying to stoke some kind of rivalry. It's pretty silly because his arguments really have no basis. He's never really done the work. Talk about proof of work. He's never spent even 10 minutes looking at the protocol, the technology, or anything about it. He argues and very broad terms and tends to talk over people, and he hasn't offered any constructive criticism at all. So same thing with Rubini and these other folks. So they don't understand really what's going on at all. So the answer is sure. It's gold is nothing wrong with gold, and it'll do well in this environment where fiat money and paper money are going to suffer. I think that paper money, fiat money, is really going to have a really rough time going forward. The U.S. dollar is going to have a lot of trouble here going forward. And so people are going to look for hard assets.
I'm glad you said that, because something that really got my attention recently, and I tweeted this out earlier this morning, on June 29th on CNBC's Crypto Trader with Rand Neuner, you had ripped up a $10 bill while saying that all fiat money is garbage and is going to zero against Bitcoin. Now, one, I want to say that was pretty hardcore. That was pretty freaking boss of me, man. And that's obviously just typical Max Keiser. But can we talk about that a little bit?
Well, first of all, I've been ripping up money on TV.
I think I lost you. I lost you.
Oh, wow. You want to call me back?
No. You're good. I'm just saying, you cut out for a second. And you're
Take it up from the top?
Yeah, if you can take it just from the top of the question, I can edit that part out.
Okay, cool. Right, so I've ripped up, thousands of dollars on TV going back 10, 12, 13 years. So the point is that it's just paper money. It's worthless. It has no backing. It's garbage, essentially. And people shouldn't give it any respect. I mean, people look at a dollar or a euro or some other fiat currency, and they believe, they worship it. It has magical powers over them. But they need to break that spell. So the way I suggest breaking that spell is you just rip it up. It's very cathartic. You just understand that it's worthless. And then so your mind can transition away from this enslavement of paper money, and you can start thinking about hard money. I think it says connection lost.
Your face is stuck. I can hear you perfectly fine. So it's just kind of your image, your video is kind of cutting in and out. At the very, very beginning, it was kind of cutting in and out. I don't know if you got bad service where you're at.
Let me explain something to you right now. Okay, here's a $10 bill. This is garbage. This is garbage. Your people in South Africa, you have your rand, right? That's going to zero. That's going to zero. This is going to zero too. Euros are going to zero. The yen's going to zero. The Chinese currency is going to zero. It's all going to zero against Bitcoin. If you don't understand that yet, you're going to be impoverished. You're going to be on the street. You're going to be begging. You're going to be out of business. You're going to be toast.
Max, do you know that it's a criminal offense to tear up?
Do you know that with the Bitcoin I have, I can buy any freaking senator or congressman I want? I make the laws. He who has the Bitcoin makes the laws, Rand. We're not going to just sit around and let the goddamn congressman tell us what to do. We've got the capital. We make the laws. We've got the Bitcoin. They don't. We got it. They don't. Do you understand?